Yeah, well, good evening and welcome to our poetry reading and event. My name is Sean Rubin, co-editor in chief of University Professors Press, along with Lewis Hoffman. And University Professors Press was established in 2012 with the mission of publishing books in humanistic and existential psychology, clinical psychology, and creativity studies. It was founded by university professors who are published authors and leaders in the field. Our intent was to found a publishing company by scholars for scholars. While many of our books are intended for a wider professional and at times general audience, we seek to maintain a scholarly sensitivity and understanding with all the books that we publish. And in speaking of tonight's poetry event, poetry is an ancient healing art used across cultures for thousands of years. In the Poetry, Healing, and Growth book series at UPP, the healing and growth facilitating nature of poetry is explored in depth through books of poetry and scholarship, as well as through practical guides on how to use poetry in the service of healing and growth. Poetry written with an intention to transform suffering into an artistic encounter is often different in process and style from poetry written for art's sake. In this series, there is engagement with the poetic greats and literary approaches to poetry, while also embracing the beauty of fresh poetic starts and encouraging readers to embark upon their own journey with poetry. Whether you are an advanced poet, avid consumer, or novice to poetry, we're confident you'll find something to inspire your thinking or your personal path towards healing and growth. And the series editors are Carol Barrett, Steve Fell, Nathaniel Granger Jr., Tom Greeney, and Lewis Hoffman. And you can find all of our books at universityprofessorspress.com. And as part of tonight's event, there'll be a 15% sales discount on various bundles for the poetry series, as well on some other folks' books. And now I'd like to move on to the introductions for tonight. First, we have Dr. Lewis Hoffman. And as I said, I'm co-editor in chief, but anyone associated with the press knows that the heart and soul and tireless efforts of Lewis Hoffman is really the lifeblood of University Professors Press. So we're grateful for everything that Lewis does. Lewis is a licensed psychologist and author. He has edited 18 books, including 8 collections of poetry, and is one of the series editors for the Poetry, Healing, and Growth series. He has also published articles on the use of poetry in therapy. An avid writer, he has had over 100 journal articles and book chapters published, and he's been recognized as a fellow of the American Psychological Association and 6 of its divisions for his contributions to the field of psychology. He serves on the editorial boards of the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, the Humanistic Psychologist, the Journal of Constructivist Psychology, and Janus Head. He is the executive director of the Rocky Mountain Humanistic Counseling and Psychological Association and teaches at the University of Denver, the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, and Saybrook University. He lives in beautiful Colorado Springs with his beautiful wife and 3 sons and 2 dogs. And while not working, he enjoys spending time in bicycle riding or hiking with his dog. And next we have Michael Moats. And Michael describes himself as a father, a husband, and a friend. His passion as a clinical psychologist lies in working with clients who are learning to redefine their lives and create new meaning. He is currently working on a book commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11 with a retired Port Authority policeman and survivor from beneath the collapsed Twin Towers. Surviving the initial collapse was only part of the story. Multiple surgeries, forced retirement, survivor's guilt, depression, and learning to live again with PTSD was waiting outside of the rubble. Michael has published 3 poetry books in various chapters and journal articles. He believes poetry is a vessel that can contain, assist in processing, and expressively share lived experiences. Additionally, he is a co-founder of the Germian International Institute of Existential Humanistic Psychology, promoting continued international dialogue and training to contribute to a more rounded perspective within the global psychological community. And though Tom Greeney will not be present tonight as one of our hosts, wanted to mention Tom Greeney, one of the editors of Our Last Walk, Using Poetry for Grieving and Remembering Our Pets. Tom was educated at Yale and the University of Vienna and the University of Michigan. He's been a psychologist in private practice for over 50 years and is a retired professor from Saybrook, UCLA, and Pepperdine. He was editor of the Journal of Humanistic Psychology for 35 years. He's a fellow of 5 divisions of the APA and poet laureate of the International Society for ethical psychology and psychiatry. His poetry books, Words Against the Void and Into the Void, are also published by University Professors Press. And so with those introductions concluded, I'd like to start with an interview with Lewis and Michael, and to have you reflect on some questions, and we'll wait for your responses. What drew you to using poetry to assist in the grieving process? And how did you come up with the idea for a book about pet loss as well?
Lewis, you care to start on that one?
So you're talking there. Why don't you go ahead? You keep going.
Okay. Lewis and I had a number of just private conversations, conversations about grief. We both enjoyed poetry, and some of our practices of just using poetry within therapy itself overlapped, and so as we communicated about it, we just kind of come up with the idea of how do we have reach a broader audience with this and promote the usefulness of it, because it's often we're not really taught how to grieve very well, and so to be able to access something, especially artistic, that can hold these difficult feelings, confusion, and help us find a way to process without it being so overwhelming, because poetry gives you that opportunity to kind of hold it out here a little bit further. It just kind of our back office conversations, I guess you'd say.
Yeah,
Lewis, yeah.
There, I think just in my own reflections, I noticed at some point, and I think I shared with Mike, that most of the poems that I've written that I like have tended to be poems about grief and loss. That they tended to be my favorite poems that I wrote. I'm really bad at writing poems about happy things, in particular, and but with the grief and loss, that was something that Mike and I had shared quite a bit. And after an earlier poetry book, which was focused on multicultural diversity, really did well. I think in both Mike and I were part of that. I was one of the editors, and Mike contributed to that. I think we started talking about this, and I actually remember less about that to some degree as our last walk, how we came to that. We were invited to present at the Existential Humanistic Institute conference out in San Francisco on poetry and grieving, and we were presenting, and Tom Greeney was one of the people that attended the presentation. And afterwards, we talked for a while after the presentation, and then standing down in the lobby afterwards, it seemed like we talked for probably close to an hour, just sharing stories about pets and pet loss, and sharing a lot of tears. And it just emerged really organically that why don't we have a book focused on that, particularly because we really realized that a lot of people struggle with the pet loss in some ways more because people don't recognize that as a real loss. And there's been some research that's come out. Even APA had a post about this a little while back, American Psychological Association, that where they were talking about the study that showed for a lot of people, they have more difficulty with their grief for pet loss than they do for people. Not that the pets are necessarily more important, though sometimes that may be the case, but I think a lot of it has to do with there's not really that space. And one of the comments we got a lot after Capturing Shadows was, this book helped me feel less alone. And so that, and I'd say that as an editor of a book, that's something that you love to hear. That if someone can say that they feel less alone reading the book, that to me is one of the great compliments. And so we thought maybe this is a way that people struggling with pet loss can feel less alone and find some meaning as well.
Yeah, and it also, one of the things I really enjoyed, even just working on both of those two books, was the different voices, because everyone has a different perspective. Every death is new, whether it's human, whether it's animal, or just regardless. And so everyone's different approach, experience, stylistic even. It just, I really enjoyed that piece of it because it spoke to me in different ways. I mean, I deal with death. Well, I've dealt with death my whole life. And so even just listening to some of these other avenues, I guess, and I don't know, one of my favorite words is just voices, just really spoke to my heart in a way that no academic book can.
Yeah. And I think that's really reflected in the books too. That I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's just so many different paths of grief, different experiences of grief that are reflected in both the books. And so regardless of your path, there's probably at least an aspect of your path that you can connect with one of these poems. And that, I think, is one of the beautiful things with it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Something you mentioned before, and I know is one of the missions of the Poetry and Growth and Healing series, is introducing and using poetry in therapy. And so I was curious how you both introduced the idea of poetry in therapy, and if there are any rules or structures that you might follow as you use it in the therapeutic process.
You know, for me, of course, I try to really understand the relationship with my client, because there are some that it wouldn't fit them. And so I try to respect that piece, not because they're incapable. It's just not their approach to life, maybe. And so I really, again, try to respect the person first. And if I think, even if they're a little bit uncomfortable with it, but they're open to it, then a lot of times I either playfully just say, you know, if you're alive, you're a poet. Let's not worry about if it's going to be perfect. Let's not worry about it if it's going to be highbrow. And for some, I've even had kind of a skeleton model for them. And I just ask them questions and plug in their words into this, just a very partial model, and then read it back to them. And they're surprised. They're surprised that they really wrote something nice. But it's also because it was really honest. There's different methods for me. One is I'll either assign them to just write something at home and with no form attached to it, just whatever they feel. Sometimes I'll have them just try to come up with even just something like a stanza within the office, or maybe I have them go look for poetry and bring it in. And then we just use that to just kind of discuss some things. And again, it's been my experience that just gives a little bit of what they call an aesthetic distance, that makes it feel just a little bit safer and not as overwhelming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that framework is that Mike developed, one of them is at the beginning of Capturing Shadows in the book. That I think that's one of the useful aspects of it. That there's a few ways that I've introduced it. One is it's Mike and I actually we share a private practice office, and so we keep out in the lobby there a number of the books in the Poetry, Healing, and Growth series, and sometimes clients will be reading them before they come in. And one of the beautiful things that I found is that when clients are reading those, they often come into session more emotionally available. And some have showed up early wanting to read those books before session. And that kind of very naturally, organically can bring it in. Then I keep right next to my desk is a file folder where I keep between 5 and 10. Some of them will vary. There's always one that's in there that I give to quite a few clients. It's now I'm going to forget the name of it. Talking to Grief by Denise Levertall. And so I'll often, when the moment seems right, pull out one of those poems, and that can be an openness to it. At other times, I'll draw on something that actually is an idea from a psychologist here in Colorado Springs, Matt Thielen. He often would ask his clients in the first session, what artistic form do you feel the most drawn to? And so that might not be poetry, for many people, but it's a way to kind of get that in to some of the arts. And for some, they might use a form of art that I'm not very well versed in or good at, but it still can be a powerful thing. So I think those are a few of the ways that I've done it over the years.
Yeah, thank you for that. And maybe just one last question before we move on to the poetry reading portion of tonight's event. During this time of global pandemic, the fears of a looming mental health crisis around the isolation, the anxiety, the deaths, and grieving that goes with living through the COVID-19 pandemic. What are your thoughts about how poetry can help with COVID grief, processing, healing?
Yeah, I think it's an important thing, and we do have a poetry book that'll be coming out hopefully in the next couple months in the same series looking at COVID. But there has been some discussions about how for a number of people, poetry has become very important through the time of COVID. It's helped to process some of the grief, to provide a container. And there's so many different ways, and we tried to at least articulate some of them in the introductions to the two books that poetry can help with it. But when so many people are cut off from some of their other forms of support, poetry can be really powerful, and the sharing of it on, even on places like Facebook and Twitter can be a way of connecting and feeling a bit less alone through this pandemic where there's been a lot of isolation and loneliness.
Yeah, same thing, Lewis, exactly what I was thinking of, the connection piece. But I also want to add, I think it also helps you kind of reconnect internally. I think there's such a cutoff. This pandemic has really caused a disengagement in many ways, and a disorientation even to things that we took for granted, trusted, we're just really comfortable with, people that we know, people that we love. And so I think, again, just the natural thing of poetry, regardless of pandemic, is that being able to really, connect with all those feelings. But again, when you share, you feel like you're connecting to others. And there's also something about the helplessness of the pandemic, yet being able to create. And in the middle of all of that, I just think is a really beautiful piece. And it marks time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you both so much for all that you do for this Poetry Healing and Growth series. And I want to thank you and all the poets for your heartfelt sharings tonight, and look forward to hearing them all here with you. So I'll turn it over to Lewis now, perhaps, who will organize the poetry reading.
Yeah. We'll start off with Mike and I'll read a poem, and then we're very fortunate that we have 13, it might be 12 now. It looks like one person maybe might not make it, but that contributed to these books that will read a poem as well, and might share a little bit about. We've asked each of the poets to try and keep it to not longer than 5 minutes. And I'll start off reading one from Our Last Walk. This has been one of the series, one of the most touching books for me in a lot of ways, partially because the front cover is actually a picture of me and Dante on one of our last walks together. And but also a dog that was very near and dear to me, Amaya, was able to put a collection of poems for her in there. And so I'm going to read the first poem from that collection, which I wrote on the night that she died. And I sent it to several close friends. And the responses were a big part of my own grieving process of working through the loss of Amaya. So this is called I Had to Say Goodbye Tonight. That big old moon wasn't quite full as I drove home tonight. A piece of it was missing. I felt that I was entering a time like that of tonight's moon, without the grace of such brevity. You lay on the mat, barely able to look up. I knew of your suffering when even the salt of my tears didn't draw your tongue. I knew the decision I did not want to make. In the midst of these many strangers, I felt no shame in my tears, no desire to hold back. I never hid anything from you, and now is not the time. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. As I held your face, cupped in my hands, I stared into those blue eyes the last time, and I wouldn't look away. So the face that loved you so deeply may journey with you from that last breath. Then they were your eyes no more. Sitting with you on the floor, at times I thought I saw a breath. I knew. My walk felt as unsteady as yours a few hours ago, as I walked to my truck in that peaceful night that held no peace for me. Back home, it felt so silent, though the noise was no different than the night before. That relaxed phase of crying settled in, as memories bearing the grieving process carried you still with me. But each time I realized there would be no more tears. A jolt set more tears free. With gasp for air as if reaching for you, you were always my comforter. So many times I heard you were just a dog, but tonight, more than ever, I wanted you to know I never believed that lie. And tonight, as I held your face through that last breath, I never wanted to say goodbye. Still don't get through that too often without at least a little tearing up on my part. Mike, when you're ready.
I was also going to read the one about my dog from our last walk, but I'm going to change it instead, and I'm going to read one that my dad wrote. He wrote it, I believe it was the night after my mom died, and it definitely ties into his spirituality as well. It's called Horse of Snow White. And I do this in honor of him because I sit here in a motel room tonight about a mile from the hospital where he is at his end of life. And so it's just another way to use poetry for my own grieving as well as for meaning and purpose. So, my wife rode away on a horse of snow white, and the things that I saw was a sheer awesome sight. 7 angels rode escort as they sang sweet refrains. My wife rode behind as the Lord held the reins. Swiftly they went with the speed of gazelles, the horses' muscles all flexed as they swished their white tails. Jesus spoke as they rode off on that snowy white horse. I'll be back for you after you've run your course. And I look forward to his freedom, where he may hug the love of his life shortly.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Yeah. And I forgot to mention, I'll leave a few seconds of silence after each poetry reading, just to give a few seconds for people to reflect before we move on to the next one. And I think Tammy was going to join us, but I don't believe Tammy is here. Okay, so we'll come back to her if she joins a little later, but we'll go with Joy Hoffman is next.
Hi. Sorry. My name is Joy Hoffman. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in northern Minnesota. My poem is about my dog too, so I feel like we have kind of a theme going. Her name was Cece, and the context of this was she had just gone to the vet, and the vet had said she would probably live to be 20. She was 16 at the time. So she already had a really good life, but the vet said she was so healthy that we would probably have her for another 4 years. And then just a few days later, she had a very tragic accident with another dog that attacked her. And so this is the poem that I read after she died. So it's called Cece. The violence around your departure and our complacency as you wandered out the patio door, out of sight, out of mind, believing you would stay nearby, even in old age, poor eyesight and hearing. The moment you entered that backyard, curious, exploring, you did not hear the shepherd behind you. We had hope, and yet we knew, shaking, scared, broken. We knew. And just like that, you were gone. But not out of sight or out of mind, still nearby. I see you, I hear you, and I wish we could start that day over again. Every damn day, I wish we could start over.
Thank you, Joy. I realize need to have Kleenexes near tonight, I guess. That one of the plans I forgot for this. Okay, next we've got Nathaniel.
It's good to see everyone tonight, and this is just very such a touching workshop, and already I just feel the emotions just welling up. But this poem was written as I was writing this particular piece. I didn't realize how much I was stuck in anger and depression and perhaps Kubler-Ross's stages of grieving, all except for acceptance. And it was written in reference to my dad, who died at age 46, very untimely death. And it was only a couple of months before his first grandson would be born. And it's titled One Last Tear. Like yesterday, decades ago, I buried your body, but not the love. I'm still angry though, and I still ask why. They said that I would get over it. They said you were in a better place. They said, I know how you feel. I lost my dog yesterday, consoled one. Time heals all wounds. At times I hear your voice. Maybe not yours, 'tis mine own voice I hear. Yours, mine, I canst not tell. Your voice gave sound to my voice. Your name made you my name. You once said, nothing beats a failure but a try. I'm trying, and yet I fail to stop wondering how life would be, could be, had you chosen to stay. I write, I pause, I sob hysterically, and now I bask in the saudade of your shadow, in the reflections of my own face, searching for what I cannot find, where there is no rhyme or reason. How many times my tears have become my meat? How many times have I cried myself to sleep, trusting to see you on the morrow? But the rabbit from the magician's hat failed to appear. After tap and tap again from the wand of time. You don't even care. How could you? I used to think it was all a lie, that you feigned your death to convince myself, but for some insurance scheme, I once saw that shenanigan played out on TV. I waited patiently for you to resurrect from your fictitious vault, pleading the haunting of your apparition. To relieve my suspicion, the leading man would miss the curtain call. My savior would succumb to the finitude past my mind's eye. You saved me from the monsters and read to me the little engine that could. You even gave the sip of what would morph this boy into a man, a shot of whiskey from the flask, your personal stash. It burned to my heart, but never did it put hair on my chest. My bleeding heart bleeds your blood, and yet 'tis my pain that I'm coarse to bear. No abracadabra, no hocus pocus. 'Tis so real, I'm disillusioned, so unfair. I wonder if you can see yourself in your grandchildren's eyes. They're all grown now. My hero, my Santa, my tooth fairy. I think that I did good, being half the man I believed you to be. I am still a child. I am still at heart a child, but have reached an age you knew not. Your life was short, severed in youth. I am growing up, I suppose, for it have been a score and some. And now I can look at you in my own eye. Do you remember? You used to demand of me to look you straight in the eye. It was proof. It wasn't a lie. Dad, I hope you can forgive me for taking so long to forgive you. And I toast to you before I sip one last tear.
Thank you, Nathaniel. I don't think it's going to be the last tear of tonight, but definitely a touching one. And Carol, we've got you up next.
Yes, thank you. And like others, I'm feeling, I'm reminded how the sharing of one loss calls up other losses for us. So I'm hoping that all of us, including members of the audience, will take each poem as an opportunity to feel again things that have occurred in our own lives and rise with them. I'd like to read a poem that I wrote for a friend. It's called The Falling of Hair for Andrea. She actually lived a number of years after the moment that this poem acknowledges. We sit at your bedside, handfuls passing from brush to hand and hand to basket. This ritual born of the medicine that chokes cancer. Your hair gives up in snarled blooms stroked from your temple. Reluctant swirls you gather and pass. Brush, gather, pass. You feared this undoing would take weeks. Instead, we make an evening of it, touching the new frame of your face, hair looped round our fingers, insistent rings. What you give me, a part of yourself, the fine rays having risen and set with you 40 odd years. I take into my hands what petals reveal of the world, vulnerable patch on your scalp growing, the fear that in the end there will be no new self strong enough to walk the wind. The basket receives its strands, carries them away. And even as we pat this firm new hair in place, color keyed to your own, we are made ready for Easter morning, the promise of a new body, bold in a single stroke. That sunburst day a handful closer, when you will look out from thickly rooted locks to behold the Savior face to face.
Lovely. Thank you, Carol. And next we've got Paul Wong.
Okay, here I am. I consider myself a weeping prophet, a man of sorrow. There are many things in this world make me sad. And the best way to express my sadness is through poetry. The poem I'm going to read to you is about an old Chinese man grieving the loss of his homeland. Okay, so here I go. The burden of time get heavier and heavier with each step uphill. I need to go home to my tiny home in this foreign land. I want to go home, but where is my home? Where my heart belongs? I must climb the hill against the gravity of age and sorrows. 1,000 sad hills, like the Yangtze River, flowing eastward. Where is my homeland? Where is the laughter of children flying kites? Where is my homeland? Where neighbors eat together after a long hard day. Every cell of mine was desperate for oxygen and for my motherland. Shall I lean on my lonely cane or cast my fate into the wind? Should I sit down and watch the sunset? But my very soul can't find rest anywhere in San Francisco. So nobody understands the loss of the homeland. Thank you. So everything went in my country, I shook up.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul, for the poem and for sharing your heart with us too. It's lovely. Yeah. Next up, we have Gina.
I'm still holding very closely Paul's generous gift. Thank you, Dr. Wong. As an Indigenous scholar, I know very much what it means to be connected to the loss of your homeland. The rough initiation of grief. This is where I live. This is the work I do. Often when I begin a talk for the public or with my students, I start with, I knew I was born to be a midwife. I just didn't know it was supposed to be at the end of life and not the beginning. So I have been catching babies and sending off souls into the mystery for a very long time. And it's where I live. And each of these kindred spirits are teaching us something if we're all paying attention. And our teachers who are dying will show us where we're stuck, where we're holding on, what we hold precious, and to be right here. And the fiercest initiation for me was for when I companioned my brother. And so I'm sharing my poem from Capturing Shadows. And one of my favorite mediums, as I've been contributing to this whole series, as Michael and Lewis know, is haiku, which I learned in the 3rd grade from one of my teachers. And it's been something that's been with me ever since. And I remember as I was companioning my brother, this one just spontaneously emerged. And it was the only practice, the spiritual practice, besides sitting still, that held me through that whole year. So I wrote a collection of haiku called Orenga. So I'll only read you one from each, and I organize them as a season. And it's called An Ecology of Grief, a haiku collection. So we'll begin with the winter of your dying time. 4 full days and nights, we sit vigil, dwelling in the house of our sorrow. This was the one that started it all. January fog, dreams across your moist front lawn. You leave me, brother. In spring, I surrender to my grief. For a moment in the sun, I almost forgot you're dead. Flowers remind me. And the anguish of summer's heartache, sliding down the burrow of my monastic silence, tears deep underground. I go out now and pretend that I'm happy. This soothes the others. And then fall's crackling transformation. This was a whole year. Birthdays, you and I in the fall. I chance memories of our childhood. And I end it with this stanza that's not a haiku. Let him rest, our mother whispers. So I let you go. From a delicate chain around my neck, I wear your perfect heart. And you speak to me now from the wisdom seat of our ancestors. No metiot.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Gina.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of emotion tonight.
Yeah, let's be with it.
So anticipated in some ways, it still is always just kind of catches. There's a surprise in it.
Just your breath.
Patrick, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Gina. I like those haiku very much. So I wrote about a couple of golden retrievers that were in the poems that were in the anthology. I'm just going to focus on Spencer. And my son is an artist, and he painted the portrait of Spencer that's behind me. And I've got 2 poems. I've got 2 short ones I'm going to read. This one's called Pause on Either Side of the Door. Spencer, my golden retriever, my best 4-legged buddy for the past 15 years, died last Thursday under the cedar tree out front. His legs, weak for months, were finally failing. He began to pee himself at night. We moved him to the garage to sleep, cleaned the floor each day, and bathed him often. I didn't hear him bark for help that last night, alone and unable to stand. My sons heard, told me in the morning after I found him in a puddle, and no, that's not what I want to talk about with Spencer. I want to say we found each other at the pound, where he stood up after we first met, a skinny 1-year-old on hind legs, put his paws on either side of the door to the cage, looked at me over his shoulder. Please, don't leave me here. I didn't. I want to say how I took him on photo trips and walks to the beach where we discovered how much he loved chasing through waves, to the off-leash parks where he ran and ran and ran, but always kept an eye on me. How he greeted me in the mornings by rushing over to bury his head in my crotch before I was ready, or walked into my office to interrupt my writing with a lean against my leg. How his tail would wag just a little when he dropped his head in my lap and I stroked his ears, or gave him a massage when his joints began to ache. How he would follow me from room to room as I passed my day. how he'd keep watch in the hall by the door at the top of the stairs. I want to own it was my fault, my decision to end his life. But he wasn't wagging that last day. Though I wasn't ready, I think he was. God, I hope so. I don't want to think he isn't here anymore because I made a mistake. Made a mistake. And this one I wrote, I've got to find it here. Hold on. I wrote a few months later. Early morning. Tonight, you caught me sitting in the grass of my dream out front under the cedar where we used to wrestle. You'd act tough, slide on your back. I'd nibble your ear, barely bearing down until you yiped. We'd both laugh. I'd scratch your belly. You'd stretch your legs and roll over with a sigh. I used to call body slam when you'd run up, drop your head into my lap and heave your 90 pounds on top of me, wagging and panting. I wasn't thinking of all this. I was just under my dream cedar in the shade when I felt the press of your heavy shoulder on my back. I knew it was you. Come to visit, to say hello. Say, remember? Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And next we've got Shelly.
Hi, everybody. It's very beautiful to be in this space tonight. And thank you for the invitation to read. It's a privilege to be here. I can't imagine how unlived my life would be had it not been for the times that I have befriended grief. And I think part of that is because I see possibilities of liberation in most things. My poem tonight is titled Vicissitudes. It is here in this silence, cast into the light between the shadows that stretch of the then and the now, warm and wet with wonder fills within, here in this silence, this sanctioned womb. Dynamic strands of collected through the dust of fractal history, binding forms that tempt us to surrender to the ineluctable mystery, existence. Open, enter, and expand. Touch here, yes, where the leader and the lure form of the deity, the flux and sustenance. In between awareness, pushing through our meetings with insatiable appetites. We crave to create new reflections of all that we dare not be. Navigate this tide, dear child, as you will push to find reason and drown again illusions. For underneath where it is wound, there is no wound that is of permanent matter. You will not break in there. Tempted is the pressure of birth as the thread is pulled that spins you out. Grieve, child. Push the petals to their bloom, for it is only here that you will come to lose your mind to all that you are not. Emerge. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelly. That was lovely. And up next, we've got Rich.
Hello. I'm going to read two poems. One is from Capturing Shadows, and I had a series of deaths in one summer, and it's been a while. In fact, I'm kind of nervous about that because there's like 3 happened in one summer, and one was expected, one was a surprise, and the other was tragic. So I got like a whole, I got the whole kit and caboodle there. So I wrote a bunch of poems that summer on death. So I'm going to read the first one here. So I had my mother-in-law die, then her sister unexpectedly, and then a person from cancer who was like 36 years old. So it was, I was spending a lot of time meeting cool people at funerals. So here is death poem number 13. It was sad that we had to meet only at these events, but nothing minor seemed to draw us near. His tick showed his apprehension. Someone unexpected sent flowers. She wanted that trinket, and it pissed the whole family off. He was a poet, at least for today. I wonder if my son will notice the wild horses beyond the graves. A lifetime of rituals for a day of reward. Even things repeated in rote can be touching now. Who did I cry for? So that's from Capturing Shadows. And this poem is from Our Last Walk. And it's kind of a sing-songy poem about something they often say about dogs. And it happened to my dog too, which is that he got loose. And when they got loose, they ran around the neighborhood, and every once in a while they run into a car, or a car runs into them. But on the other hand, I was kind of impressed about, on the day that you go out, you got loose. It's kind of cool. And it's sort of a Rich thinks that's cool. So this one's called He Got Loose. On the day that I die, I hope I run loose. On the day that I die, I hope I run loose. People forget that freedom is something you choose. Someday, I hope I can be like you. They train us with whips and leashes and the hangman's noose. If you play, laugh, or smile, they'll treat you like a fool. My inner child got chained up while I attended school. On the day that I die, I hope I run loose. They teach us to sit down and shut up and don't make a move. You have to listen to your masters and obey every rule. But if they leave the door open, no one can fault you. On the day that you died, you ran loose. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. It's one of the nice things about things like this is you can read poems and imagine them so differently. I never would have imagined in my readings for it to go quite like that. And so it's lovely to be able to hear in the author's voice the way that it comes to life. Okay. And see, next we've got Victoria.
Hi, good evening, everyone. For me, grief has been a process. It's something that is never easy, as we all know, and why we're all here sharing. For my grandma, especially, because being Latina, grandmothers play a huge role in our development. And so, especially being our second mom, sometimes the most consistent person in our lives. And through grief, it's always memory. And for me, it's also been the senses. And so this one is one for her. It's called Stansted, and it's also from Capturing Shadows as well. Remains of summer linger into this fall evening. Starch flower curtains hold guard against the warm breeze. In the dim kitchen, against dark brown paneling, I sit and pause. This is where I remember. You left me unfinished, still eager to learn. I understand enough, but I don't know everything. My hands are young, but rough from your lessons. You taught me too well, and you knew that. Women of our line don't stop working. We are healers, workers, and mothers, women who carry the families and move our traditions, but we do not pause. Tonight, for you, I do. Without you here, my senses yearn for what is gone. Footsteps, the creaks of the house, and smells of remedies. But you are gone, gone my teacher, my healer, my nurturer. I'm alone, our workspace so quiet now, but I've paused for too long. It's not enough to remember you or let go of you. To my feet, there is much to do.
Lovely. Thank you, Victoria. And up next, we've got Emily.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to do this. My poem I wrote about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was time when I was changing a lot as a young adult, and also a lot of losses hit me all at once. I think that it definitely has some relevance for me as I reread it not too long ago. The title is Processing, and it's from Capturing Shadows. All right. I hear grief and loss. I experience grief and loss. Just when I think grief is lost, it finds a way back around. Recent events pile high. Groans of humanity flood the newspaper. A woman badly injured. Her child died. Dare not ask what's next. Leaves me in fear of getting the call or text. I try to see the good, be the good, pull back the heavy curtain, shed some light through the cloudy window, although so much remains uncertain. I painted my future 3 years ago, a time when I thought everything was perfect. The painting was not finished. It has evolved, grown with me. Doors close, but others eventually open. I could close my eyes and my heart, but I choose to keep them open. My experience is not for nothing. I hear grief and loss, I experience grief and loss, and each time it comes around, I'm steady, stronger somehow, feet planted firmly on the ground.
Lovely, Emily. Thank you. And next up, we have Nance.
Hi, everyone. My poem also comes from a time, at least 10 years ago, when so many losses seemed to come all at once. And this one is from our last walk. So I think we underestimate these four-legged, beautiful souls and beings. And my poem is called Sunny, which was the name of our golden retriever. Tuesdays, they did come and go, often predictable, like a tweed coat. Patterns lending comfort, yet going nowhere memorable. A subtle sameness, like a unified garment. No sleeves or collars missing, buttons in place. No bachelor button in the lapel. One Tuesday in November was not the same. Every little thing was different. But I did stay with the patterns. It took much and great will just to feel the subtle comfort of the tweed, because every little thing was different on this Tuesday. We took our morning walk, you and I, through wet autumn leaves, green, gold, red, brown, all mingled and staining one another. My girl, you paused. There was nothing to pause about. No critter scurrying, not even a tennis ball. The pause haunted me as your gait lingered. Where was your zest? The way you met each day, every day. I desperately threw the ball. And then the dread nearly drowned me. Through my great will, I kept this secret at bay. We sauntered home together, you and I, as I tucked the great fear away in pockets of tweed, feeling just to be sure the buttons were in place. I knew. Yet each moment my great will exerted such force of optimism, crushing optimism. I reminisced lying next to you in the bitter cold that icy winter night, me shaking with grief of another ending, you placing your paw on my arm, whispered your care, me scared, you healthy aging, but let me see here, dog years times 7, the warmth of your cozy, soft dog smell body next to mine. We spooned. From deep within my shaking body came a plea, joining with tightly woven corners of fear in my mind. I prayed to you like a child to a god, and this is what was said. Please don't you leave me too. Give me one more year. Sonny, give me one more year. Fear hiding again as I ritualistically leave for work, bidding you goodbye just for the day. I notice a drop of bright red blood from your soft, beautiful nostril. The world stopped. Tuesday is not the same. All threads unraveled, watching, listening, feeling your breath. Fear is here, death is here, demanding to be known, refusing to be tucked or buried into pockets of tweed. It has swallowed me, and you are taking care of me now. With your eyes and the language of your body so intimately known to me, I wished as hard as I could, really hard, that Tuesday had never come. Days have their stories, one turns to the other, and the story with it. All the time I know, I wish and keep on wishing as hard as I can. It's exhausting. Tuesday turned to Wednesday and Thursday. Each place there is no place to turn, just no place to turn. We all light candles of hope, yet the hope is hidden far, far away, deep in the caverns of my furiously beating heart. The 4 chambers don't even feel unified. Where are the subtle, comforting patterns? Blood flow is choreographed by piercing, screaming fear, but I don't scream. All is trapped. Hope evaporates like the mist in the morning. It is gone, very cold. Only you exist, nothing else. Turning in Tuesday's unified tweed coats all gone, the world has become this 1 hour with you. You quiver and convulse. My gentle giant cannot find peace. We all tremble, weep, frantically try to comfort you. We cannot find a way. Rushing to a darkened, quiet room on a table now, you lie groundless. It is late. I hear the words, just let us know when you are ready. We wait. Our son is on the way. We clutch, we grasp, we tell stories, we breathe, we weep. Desperation is turning to the deepest ache I know. You, Sunny, our golden retriever, our bodhisattva, the love of our lives. You leave us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nance. Okay, and next we have up Aliya.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, for this opportunity. The piece that I will be reading from Capturing Shadows, I wrote in 2014 when I was 19 years old. So my writing style has changed a lot, but the emotion I still resonate with very much so. And it's about my grandfather, who actually passed about a year and a half after I wrote this. So I always feel like I grieved a little bit too early. But it's all about part of the process, and it is called Trying to Manage. I do want to discuss with you all the option of a hospice and just go over all that will entail. He doesn't have to go to a hospital or a nursing home at any time. A hospice can be in the comfort of your own home. The point of a hospice is just to make sure the person is as comfortable as possible before they prepare to slam. I run outside, hurrying to get to my bus stop, pop my earbuds in and blast the most uplifting music I can possible. I get into the school, rush upstairs to poetry class, smile and laugh with the classmates. I recite poetry like it's nothing, as if poetry comes naturally, as if poetry doesn't literally suck the life out of me at times. I crack jokes with the teacher, smile as brightly as possible, masking the tears I cried right before coming to class. Nobody knows what's going on. I wish I didn't know what was going on. I wish what was going on stopped. I wish I could stop thinking of what's going on, but constant conversations are taking its toll. The agony is hurting me physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. The loss of breath is taking mine away. The pain I see is driving me. My grandfather is dying, and I can't do anything about it. My grandfather is dying, and he doesn't want anyone to do anything about it. 18 years, and the most I knew about my grandfather was that he was in the Army. Had no idea what war he fought in. 18 years, and I knew he earned a Purple Heart. Had no idea what for. 18 years, and I knew that his big thing was giving people a big thumbs up. 18 years, and the day after I made it to my 19th year, I found out that his time was coming to an end. I live with him. I see it all happening. I live there, so I know more than the rest. My grandfather is dying, and I'm just trying to manage. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aliya. That was wonderful. It's such a gift after having read and gone through these poems so many times to hear them being read and the differences that come out in hearing them being read. I'm going to read one more poem to close. That's a poem from Tom Greeney. Tom Greeney is one of the series editors of the Poetry, Healing, and Growth, and he's got several books that have been published of poetry. He's including some books for children, as well as a number of books published by University Professors Press, Words Against the Void, poems for and about elders, and then I'll read a poem from his latest one, Into the Void, an existential psychologist faces death through poetry. And this is a collection of poems that Tom wrote about facing death. Tom is now at a point of his life where he's thinking a lot about death, and struggling some with his memory. And these were poems that he wrote through this phase, and an incredibly powerful collection. And so this poem that I'm gonna read is called Grim Poems. I think an appropriate one to kind of finish the night on. How strange it is that grim poems have a way of brightening a gloomy, morbid day. I dwell on them no matter how morose, and crave a strong and nearly lethal dose. Don't make me laugh, I cannot stand the pain. From humor, there is nothing one can gain. Don't let some corny, cheerful Hallmark card delude you that life's anything but hard. Just give me dreary, bleak, downcast views. That's the stuff my starving soul renews. All right. Well, that concludes the portion of the reading, and I don't think we had questions online, but if there are any yet, feel free to type them up. So maybe what we can do is just open it up for a few minutes for all the poets. Feel free to take your mics off and just have some discussion and reflection on what this, anything that you want to share just about your experience of tonight or with the books.
I must apologize because I did not expect myself to get all shook up.
You did not expect, I missed the last part there.
I didn't expect myself to get all shook up, when I read,
Oh.
So
Oh.
I read the work clearly.
I appreciated
emotion, which I did not expect.
I appreciated your emotions so much, Paul. And I can't tell you that I thought it was beautiful that you shared that with us, and I am deeply, deeply appreciative of it. So I don't think you need to apologize at all. I love that.
It was the perfect music to your words, Paul.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say how much I appreciate hearing poetry read. It's just so beautiful to hear everyone's voices and to see your faces, and this context of our shared humanity is just so beautiful and opens my heart and feels just very uplifting, and it's helpful, very helpful to me.
It's like what you said at the beginning, Louis, that it makes us not feel alone in our grief, and that I think that if it's healing. So thank you for that.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate that. And, I think some of that, of what's expressed in that poem by Tom, that there's something about these grim poems, that sad poems that bring up tears, that bring up joy at the same time. And I think that's one of the really powerful things of sharing, is that when we can share emotions openly and have them received, they really are transformative. And Tom, the poem, in his witty way, most of Tom's poems are humorous and witty and often sarcastic, but they have a way of bringing together different emotions at the same time. And that's really what I felt through tonight. Was I think probably every poem, if not close to, I had some tears welling up in my eye, but at the same time there was joy, and that's the beauty of it, when we can hold the sadness and the joy together.
I have this quote in my email signature from Francis Weller, because it always reminds me exactly of that, Louis, where he says that grief and love are sisters woven together from the beginning, and their kinship reminds us that there's no love that does not contain loss, and no loss that is not a reminder of the love we carry for what we once held close. And when folks, ask me, how can you tend to grief all day, in your private practice? And I just remind folks that I'm such a humble witness to love stories all day. So, I mean, that's what it is when you are a witness to grief. You're tending and holding love stories every moment. unrequited love, the love you wish you had, the love you did have, the love you don't have anymore, the love of our beloved four-leggeds. I had a dog poem too. Yeah, it's all love.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found very grabbing with the poems that were read, and particularly the one read by Aliya, a reference to her granddad, that the object of the majority of the poems, the objects are no longer with us by reason of death, but the poems were very much alive. And even as I was reading my poem, you know, even though it's back then, just reading it again, it really confirmed to me that the poetry within and of itself is very living. And so, and it really just, to me, it just really, really nails how important poetry work is, because it's not just some dead prose spewed out on paper, but it's very much alive. And so I really appreciate this space and this moment, and speaking, I guess, what we could call living word.
That reminds me some of the story for the title, which that was Mike's. The title was Mike's idea. I wonder, Mike, I wonder if you would mind sharing a little bit about how the title came up there, and also the image that goes with it on the front of the book.
Yeah, there's a living there in Colorado, up there in Monument, just about 5 miles from Lewis. There's a spot probably another 5 miles away that I really enjoy hiking. It's a nice big plateau, views of valleys from both sides, about a 5.5 mile loop you can walk around. And every time you walk out, the mountains shift just a little bit. The clouds hit different. I mean, there's just a view every time you step into a new area, which quite honestly is kind of like grief, right? Because everyone's new. But I remember standing out over this overlook, and I just happened to turn, and when I turned, I caught my shadow being cast alongside this other rock wall. And I just was thinking about how many shadows have passed this way. And not just humans, just how many shadows of living things have passed this way. And, you know, like vapor here for a moment and gone. And I just so appreciated, I wasn't appreciating necessarily my shadow as much as what it stood for in that moment. And I always carry a camera or a phone or something with me. And I just kind of dropped my hand down and stuck it by my leg and took a couple pictures. I hope I finally got a good one. And in there was able just to, well, capture that moment, capture that shadow as the symbolism of, I guess, just how short we are here. And sometimes even that fleeting moment of just interacting, just being able to see even a couple people's faces. Many of you I know, but seeing a couple people's faces that I've never been able to meet, only been able to read their words. And so being able to just, even in this moment, capture that shadow. And so that's kind of the backdrop of the story. And so when Lewis and I were talking about the title and the book, the picture just popped right into mind and just said, think I got the right one for this.
So even the poets were shadows until you met them tonight.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful story, Mike. And one of the things I'm reminded of in how sudden that moment was for you, that discovery, that fresh discovery of something really profound that just happened in that split second, in that moment. Yeah. And it reminds me in our own writing that we can start anywhere. You know, if we're dealing with a loss, whether it's one we've already experienced or one we anticipate, it really doesn't matter. We can start anywhere and still find a thread to something profound in our story.
Yeah. No, and thank you for that, because it reminded me of the poem I was originally going to read was actually written, and I'm glad you said that about you can start anywhere. It can be a reflection, it can be any time. That was one that I wrote throughout the entire day. And it was while my dog was dying and I was having to make that tough decision. But I just remember I'd go and I'd write a couple lines. And then every time I felt something, I'd write a couple lines. And so even just holding that whole entire day together, you prompted that thought when you said start anytime.
Poems kind of have their own life that way. Some of them come in a quick spurt. Some of them develop over days, months, or I even had one that it developed over about 5 years, before it was done. And it's one of the I think great things about poems is watching how each find their own life.
Yeah. And their own music is something I want to appreciate in this moment. The musicality that shone through in Rich's and Aliya's and Paul's, in those various expressions. And besides the grief, I companion the dying. So Aliya's the intensity of the music of her poem, just clutching your heart. Having been a witness to that energy is. It was so palpable. Thank you, Aliya. It was beautiful.
Thank you. I find it really fascinating that I actually, I've dealt with a lot of loss, unfortunately. Like in high school, I had a few friends that committed suicide and things of that nature, but I'd never written a poem about grief or about loss. I just kind of dealt with it. And this was literally the only poem I'd ever written about grief. And I wrote it maybe a few weeks before Dr. Hoffman and Dr. Moats made the call. And I was like, wow, this is
synchronicity.
A very intense coincidence. And I'm very grateful for it because I really think that writing it and going through the book helped me in the entire grieving process.
And I hope we all get loose someday, Rich. That ought to be our existential reach. It's beautiful.
The first kind of feedback we got on the book outside of the people that had contributed, I think it was the first, was someone that wrote a letter and who had lost her son and said that friends just weren't helpful a lot of the time, and left her feeling even that much more alone, that her friends seemed not to know what to do, and she would keep the Capturing Shadows by her bed and read 1 or 2 poems every night, and that was part of what helped her get through. And that just it's lovely to hear that it has that type of impact. But I think it speaks to what poems like this can do.
Yeah, I'd mention that being part of the UPP board, I have a bunch of the books, and I go out every once in a while, pre-COVID, of course, and I'd put out a table with all the different titles on it, and it's almost like a Rorschach to see which book the person comes to the table picks up. It's really interesting because some will go for art books, but some people will latch onto a book and they'll pick it up. And Most of the time when they do that, we're going to sell that one. But it's interesting to watch how people do that, and they'll read a couple and then they'll tell you a story. So it's a fun thing to do if you ever have a little bazaar or something like that, to set out a series of these books and just watch people interact with them when they come up and what they tell you about. I think it's a lot of fun. So consider doing that.
Well, we are here right at the end. So I want to thank everyone who's watched online, for watching. The recording, I believe, will stay up on there, and we've got a recording we'll put up on YouTube as well. And just really appreciate everyone participating. And we do, and I'll make sure it gets put up in here, but the financial side of University Professors Press agreed that we could have all the books by Tom Greeney and the Capturing Shadows and Our Last Walk, as well as the full series of Poetry, Healing, and Growth books on sale for 15% off. So it's for the individual books of Tom, or Tom Greeney's bundle, Our Last Walk, Capturing Shadow, or there's 11 books in the series now that normally are $200, and so 15, that's already at a discount. So there's another 15% off on top of that. So that'll just be for a short time. So if you're interested in this series, that's a nice opportunity to be able to get the full series. And we hope to continue to put out some more books, particularly if they sell well. We'll keep putting them out. We have another one we're working on social justice, and one on COVID right now in the series, and hopefully there will be others to follow over time. So, and also want to mention that next Tuesday, the 20th, we will have another one of these that will be a book release celebration for a book that Lisa Xochitl Vallejos and myself co-edited on parenting and poetry, called Lullabies and Confessions. And then a week after that, on the 27th, Carol, Nathaniel, and I will be doing another one of these on the full Poetry, Healing, and Growth series. So if you enjoyed the reading tonight, please come back and join us for next Tuesday and the following Tuesday for those two events, where we'll have, similar to this, we'll have a little bit of discussion followed by a poetry reading with a number of just wonderful poets. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Thanks to all of the poets who read. Thanks, Sean, for hosting all of this.
Thank you to all the poets.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you for organizing it, Hoffman.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Good day, everybody.
Have a good night.
Okay.
Farewell.
Good night.
Blessings.